It all started with what seemed like a simple disagreement in a team meeting. We were assigned to a major project, one that could determine future promotions, and tensions were high. I had always maintained a calm and professional demeanor, focused on doing my best work without stepping on anyone's toes. But she, let's call her Clara, had a different approach. She was all about appearances, mastering the art of networking, and charming the higher-ups while contributing very little of substance. When I pointed out a flaw in her data analysis, purely from a technical perspective, she didn't take it as constructive feedback. I noticed the cold look in her eyes, the fake smile that followed, and a sudden shift in her tone. From that day things started to feel different. At first it was subtle. She began excluding me from important emails, scheduling meetings without informing me, and making sly comments in front of others that painted me as incompetent. I shrugged it off, assuming she'd cool down. But her campaign didn't stop. One afternoon I was called into my manager's office, completely blindsided. I was told there had been complaints about my behavior, about how I was hostile, difficult to work with, and disrespectful toward team members. I sat there frozen, confused and angry, trying to understand what was happening. I asked for clarification, specifics, anything to defend myself, but was told the complaints were anonymous and serious enough to warrant a formal investigation. The next day I was placed on administrative leave pending the outcome. I walked out of the office with my head spinning. Overnight I became the subject of gossip and whispers. Friends at work distanced themselves. My inbox remained silent. My phone didn't ring. No one asked for my side of the story. It was as though Clara had flipped a switch and erased everything I had worked for. I had built my reputation on hard work, integrity, and professionalism, and now it was all under attack because of one vindictive person. What hurt the most was the betrayal. We had shared lunches, brainstormed on projects, and even celebrated small wins together. I had trusted her, supported her ideas in meetings, and even helped her fix her presentation when she panicked before a client pitch. And yet, she saw me as a threat, someone whose growing credibility might outshine her carefully curated image. I realized then that this wasn't just office politics. This was personal warfare. She was playing a dangerous game, one she had likely played before. While I sat at home trying to make sense of it all, my anxiety grew. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, constantly checking emails for any update. Every passing day felt like a slow bleed. I started doubting myself, wondering if I had unknowingly done something wrong. But deep down I knew I hadn't. I knew this was orchestrated. I started recalling moments, small eerie details I had brushed off earlier. How she had suddenly taken a keen interest in my schedule, how she once asked about my performance reviews, how she would hover near my desk when I was on calls. It all came back in flashes. And in that moment something shifted in me. I wasn't going to let her destroy me. If she wanted war, I would give her one, not through petty drama but through truth, patience, and strategy. But first I needed to stay calm, clear my mind, and rebuild. I began collecting every piece of communication I had with Clara, emails, texts, chat logs. I started writing a timeline of every event, every interaction, and who else was present. I pulled copies of my work, tracked my contributions, documented everything meticulously. I contacted a trusted coworker off the record, someone I knew had seen how things really unfolded. They agreed to help discreetly. The more I investigated, the more I realized how deliberate and calculated her actions were. She had been setting traps, twisting words, and using half-truths to build a case against me. But in her arrogance, she had underestimated one thing: my resolve to fight back with everything I had. Once I made the decision to stop playing the victim and start defending myself, my first move was to go through all my saved emails, work documents, and chat transcripts. I wasn't sure what I was looking for exactly, but I knew I needed proof, concrete, undeniable proof that Clara had set me up. I spent hours poring through old conversations, tracking the progression of our interactions, and noting anything that seemed suspicious or manipulative. The deeper I dug, the more patterns emerged. I noticed how she would always follow up my contributions to a project with subtle corrections or comments that suggested I had misunderstood the assignment. In meetings, she would agree with my points only to twist them later in private emails to leadership, making it seem like she had come up with the ideas herself or that I was taking credit for others' work. One particular email stood out to me. It was a recap Clara had sent to our manager after a team presentation I had led. In it, she praised the team's effort but claimed that I had dismissed some of her suggestions, created confusion in execution, and refused to collaborate effectively. I remembered that day clearly. She had barely contributed and spent most of her time scrolling through her phone. No one had raised any issues with my leadership during the project, and the client had sent glowing feedback about our work. I compared her email to the meeting minutes and found multiple discrepancies. It became clear that she was building a narrative behind the scenes, using carefully worded reports and isolated incidents to construct a false story. Next, I looked into our internal messaging system. I found old chat threads where I had clarified project details, asked for updates, and offered assistance. Messages she later claimed I never sent. Luckily, I had timestamps and full chat histories. I backed everything up, printed hard copies, and created a detailed dossier documenting each false claim she had made along with evidence to refute it. I even found an instance where she had forwarded an email to HR selectively deleting parts of the thread that made her look bad. That one move was a goldmine. I still had the original thread saved. It showed how she manipulated context and misrepresented our exchange to make it appear I had been unprofessional and dismissive. Realizing the weight of what I had discovered, I decided to reach out to a few trusted colleagues, people who had worked closely with both of us and witnessed many of these situations firsthand. I didn't ask them to take sides. I just asked them if they remembered specific meetings or interactions and if they'd be willing to give an honest account if asked. Most of them were shocked when I told them about the accusations and investigation. They told me that I had always been respectful and detail-oriented and that it didn't make sense. One colleague even recalled how Clara had once jokingly said, "Sometimes you've got to play the game to stay on top," after she undermined another teammate. At the time he thought she was just being sarcastic, but now it painted a clearer picture. Armed with all this, I composed a formal rebuttal. I didn't make it emotional or accusatory. I laid out the facts in chronological order, supported by emails, chat logs, and statements from colleagues. I requested a meeting with HR and submitted my report confidentially, asking them to take a second look at the so-called complaints against me. When I finally sat across from them again, I could see the change in their demeanor. This wasn't just a defense, it was a revelation. I showed them how Clara had manipulated the narrative, how the evidence contradicted her claims, and how this wasn't an isolated incident but a calculated attack on my character and position within the company. I emphasized that my only goal was to clear my name and ensure that truth prevailed, no matter what decisions were made next. Ask ChatGPT. After submitting my rebuttal, HR went silent for a few days. It felt like the longest stretch of time in my life. Every morning I would wake up hoping for an email, a message, anything that suggested my evidence had made an impact. Then one morning, I received a calendar invite from the head of HR for a formal follow-up meeting. I walked into that room prepared, not just with documents but with a firm resolve. I wasn't just there to defend myself anymore, I was there to expose a pattern of manipulation that went beyond just me. They started by acknowledging the depth of the report I had submitted and thanked me for providing such organized documentation. I could tell they had taken it seriously. They asked me to go over a few specific incidents. I calmly walked them through each one, referencing timestamps, forwarding emails on the spot when needed, and showing screenshots of chat messages that completely contradicted the allegations made against me. They listened carefully, occasionally taking notes and exchanging glances that I couldn't quite decipher. As the meeting continued, I mentioned how Clara had a habit of isolating teammates and rewriting narratives in her favor. I shared how others had experienced similar things, though not to the same degree, and how fear of backlash had kept them silent. HR asked me if I would be willing to let them interview some of the colleagues I had mentioned. I agreed without hesitation. That's when things started to move quickly. Over the next few days, I quietly learned that several team members had been called in for private conversations. Some of them later told me, off the record, that they were finally honest about what they'd witnessed, that Clara had a way of spinning stories, that she took credit for others' work, and that she often used selective information to make herself look better at the expense of others. One person even revealed she had been pressured by Clara to adjust the feedback she submitted in performance reviews. It was as if a dam had broken. People who had kept their heads down for so long finally found the courage to speak up. With this flood of new information, HR launched an internal investigation into Clara's past conduct. They pulled performance records, past emails, and anonymous complaints that had been quietly dismissed over the years. Patterns started to emerge. This wasn't the first time Clara had played this game. There were other employees before me who had quietly left the company or transferred departments after similar issues. They just never had the proof or the strength to push back. I did. Eventually, Clara was called into a meeting. I wasn't there, but I later heard from someone on the HR team that she had tried to play innocent, claiming she was misunderstood, and that her intentions were only ever professional. But when they presented the hard evidence, Her edited emails, the chat threads, the feedback from other employees, her facade began to crack. Apparently she tried to deflect, then blame others, then claim harassment herself. It was a last-ditch effort to reverse the momentum, but it didn't work. Meanwhile, HR arranged another meeting with the department head and leadership. This time I was asked to present my findings again, but now with full support. They wanted to ensure that what happened to me wouldn't be swept under the rug, and that steps would be taken to prevent future situations like this. I made my case one final time, highlighting not just the personal cost I had borne but the larger issue of unchecked internal toxicity. It wasn't just about clearing my name anymore, it was about changing a culture of silence and fear. By the end of that week, Clara was no longer part of the company. An email was sent out stating that she had moved on to pursue other opportunities, but everyone knew the truth. A follow-up communication from HR laid out new protocols to ensure workplace transparency and introduced an anonymous reporting system for unethical behavior. I had gone from being accused, isolated, and nearly broken to becoming the reason a long-standing problem was finally addressed. In the weeks that followed her dismissal, the atmosphere in the office shifted noticeably. People started speaking more openly, lighter, as if a heavy, invisible pressure had been lifted. Colleagues who had once distanced themselves out of fear or confusion began approaching me again, not just to apologize, but to thank me for standing up when others hadn't dared. Some even shared their own past encounters with Clara's manipulation, revealing how she had subtly planted doubts, twisted words, and created friction within teams just to protect her image and gain favor with higher-ups. What shocked me most was how far back her pattern went and how many people had been quietly affected. Despite being vindicated, I wasn't immediately filled with joy or pride. What I felt more than anything was exhaustion. The emotional toll of the entire ordeal had weighed heavily on me. Being forced to question my worth, my integrity, and my place in the company had left deep internal scars. But I also felt a strange kind of clarity, a sharpened awareness of how fragile workplace reputations could be and how easily someone could manipulate perceptions if left unchecked. I learned that truth doesn't always rise quickly to the surface. It has to be protected, investigated, and sometimes fought for. Soon after Clara's exit, the company offered me a chance to return to my previous position, fully reinstated with back pay and a formal written apology from HR. While it was satisfying to know that my name had been cleared, I didn't accept right away. I needed time to reflect on what I had been through, on whether this environment could ever feel safe or trustworthy again. Eventually, I agreed to return, but with conditions: greater oversight into HR processes, the introduction of peer-reviewed performance evaluations, and monthly check-ins to ensure ethical behavior across teams. To my surprise, leadership agreed to every term. A few months later, I was promoted, not just because of my performance but because of how I handled the situation. They told me I had shown leadership under pressure, resilience in the face of injustice, and an unwavering commitment to truth. Ironically, the very career Clara had tried to destroy had now grown stronger than ever. Her attempt to ruin me had backfired so completely that it became the catalyst for a systemic change within the company. Policies were rewritten, new training was introduced, and HR hosted workshops on workplace ethics and recognizing manipulation. But the real consequence of Clara's actions wasn't just about her being fired or me being promoted, it was about her reputation beyond the company. Word spread quickly in the industry, especially in our relatively tight professional circle. Other companies she had applied to contacted us for references, and the truth could no longer be hidden behind polished resumes and rehearsed interviews. I didn't have to say much. Her file now spoke for itself: falsified claims, unethical conduct, and a trail of documented deceit. Her image, once curated so carefully, had shattered. Eventually, I heard through the grapevine that Clara was struggling to find stable work. The companies she tried to join either rejected her after background checks or hired her temporarily before letting her go. Her social media presence turned quiet, her once boastful posts replaced by vague updates and silence. People who used to admire her now spoke of her with caution, a warning about what happens when ambition turns toxic. I never gloated. I never posted about what happened. I didn't need to. The truth had done its work. And yet, the greatest victory wasn't her fall, it was my survival. I had faced a coordinated, malicious attack on my character and come out not only intact but stronger. I had proven to myself and to others that integrity, when paired with persistence and evidence, could triumph even in the darkest situations. I had become the example others looked to when they wondered if it was worth speaking up. Through the ashes of what she tried to burn down, I had built something far more powerful than revenge: respect, resilience, and the unshakable knowledge that I had fought back and won without becoming like her.